Welcome back, you beautiful architects of your own chaos. I've been waiting for you to arrive here, to this exact moment, because something needs to be said out loud. Something they prayed you'd never figure out. See, while you were busy trying to heal, trying to move forward, trying to be the bigger person, they were in the shadows, orchestrating something so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that if I told you everything right now, your hands would start shaking. I'm not talking about the betrayal you already know about. I'm not talking about the lies you've already uncovered. I'm talking about the layers beneath that, the meetings you weren't invited to, the conversations where your name was poison on their tongues, the plans they made while smiling in your face. You thought you knew the full story, but you didn't. You thought you'd seen their worst, but you hadn't. And today we're pulling back every single curtain. Let me start with this uncomfortable truth. While you were struggling, while you were doubting yourself, while you were asking yourself what you did wrong, they were laughing. Not publicly, not where you could see, but in those private group chats, in those late-night phone calls, in those casual coffee meetups where your name became the entertainment. They dissected your pain like it was a Netflix series they were binge-watching. They analyzed your breakdown like amateur psychologists with popcorn. They screenshotted your vulnerable moments and passed them around like trading cards. And the worst part, the part that's going to make your stomach turn, they weren't doing it out of hate. They were doing it because watching you suffer made them feel powerful. Your pain was their proof that they'd won. Your confusion was their victory lap. Your silence was their applause. But here's where it gets darker, where it gets truly disturbing. They didn't just talk about you. They actively worked to keep you isolated, to keep you questioning yourself, to keep you trapped in that mental prison they'd built around you. Every time you started to heal, they'd send a message, a reminder, a carefully crafted sentence designed to rip the wound open again. Every time you started to find your footing, they'd spread another rumor, plant another seed of doubt, manufacture another crisis. And they did it so subtly, so strategically, that you blamed yourself for not being able to move on. You thought you were the problem. You thought your healing was taking too long. You thought you were too sensitive, too damaged, too broken. But the truth is, they were actively sabotaging your recovery because your healing threatened their narrative. If you got better, if you thrived, if you proved them wrong, their entire story would collapse. Now let's talk about the manipulation tactics they used, the psychological warfare they waged without you even realizing it was happening. They used something called covert antagonism, where they'd hurt you while positioning themselves as innocent, concerned, or even helpful. They'd ask how you were doing with that tone that suggested you were falling apart. They'd offer advice that was actually criticism wrapped in false concern. They'd bring up your past mistakes disguised as trying to help you learn from them. Every interaction was a trap. Every conversation was a minefield. Every text message was laced with subtext, designed to make you doubt your own perception of reality. And when you finally reacted, when you finally defended yourself, when you finally said enough, they'd play the victim. They'd tell everyone you were unstable, aggressive, unreasonable. They'd rewrite history so fast your head would spin. The person who spent months tormenting you suddenly became the innocent party who was just trying to be a friend. They wanted to find the weakness in you, the flaw they could exploit, the crack they could wedge open until you shattered completely. But here's what they didn't count on. Here's what their little psychological experiments failed to predict. You didn't break the way they wanted you to. You didn't crumble into a cautionary tale they could reference at parties. You didn't become the example they needed to validate their superiority. Instead, you did something they never prepared for. You went silent. You withdrew. You disappeared into yourself and started rebuilding from a place they couldn't touch, couldn't monitor, couldn't manipulate. And that silence, that absence, that refusal to give them access to your internal world anymore, that terrified them. Because silence from someone they're used to controlling feels like losing grip on reality itself. Let me tell you what happened in those rooms you weren't in, those conversations where your name echoed like a curse word. They convinced themselves they were the heroes of this story, that everything they did was justified because you deserved it somehow. They built an entire mythology around your character, painting you as the problem, the drama, the chaos. And the most twisted part is they started believing their own lies. They genuinely convinced themselves that you were the toxic one, that you were the manipulator, that you were the source of all dysfunction in the group. Meanwhile, every single action they took was designed to hurt you, isolate you, destroy your reputation, and make you question your own sanity. But they couldn't see it. Or maybe they could, and they just didn't care. Because admitting what they'd done would mean facing the monster in their own reflection. And most people aren't brave enough for that kind of honesty. Here's something they never told you, something they deliberately kept hidden. There were people who wanted to reach out to you, who knew what was happening was wrong, who felt guilty about participating in your destruction. But every time someone showed signs of breaking rank, the group would close in on them, reminding them of the narrative, reinforcing the story, making sure everyone stayed on the same page. It was a cult mentality where questioning the group's version of events meant becoming the next target. So those people stayed silent even though their conscience was screaming. They watched you suffer alone because protecting themselves felt more important than protecting the truth. And now that time has passed, some of them lay awake at night thinking about what they participated in, what they allowed to happen, what they could have stopped if they'd had courage. But courage in the moment is rare, and retrospective guilt is cheap. Let's get into the gaslighting, because that's where they really excelled, where they turned psychological manipulation into an art form. Gaslighting isn't just lying, it's making you doubt your own memory, your own experiences, your own perception of reality. They'd do something cruel, then deny it happened. They'd say something vicious, then claim you misunderstood. They'd hurt you deliberately, then act confused when you were upset, as if your pain was irrational, oversensitive, imaginary. And over time, this constant denial of your reality started to fracture your relationship with truth itself. You stopped trusting your instincts. You started second-guessing your memories. You began to wonder if maybe you were crazy, if maybe you were making things up, if maybe you were the problem after all. That was the goal. They wanted you unstable, uncertain, dependent on their version of events because that gave them power. Your confusion was their control. But here's what they didn't anticipate. Gaslighting only works if the person being manipulated stays engaged, stays connected, stays within range of the manipulation. The moment you stepped back, the moment you created distance, the moment you stopped seeking their validation or explanation or closure, their power evaporated. They became performers without an audience, manipulators without a target, bullies without a victim. And that drove them absolutely insane. Because the thing about manipulative people is they need you to react. They need your anger, your tears, your confusion, your attempts to prove yourself. That reaction is the fuel that keeps their engine running. When you went cold, when you went silent, when you stopped giving them anything to work with, they lost the plot. They didn't know what to do with someone who simply refused to play the game anymore. Now let's talk about the smear campaign, because that's where it gets really ugly, really calculated, really deliberate. A smear campaign isn't just talking behind someone's back. It's a coordinated effort to destroy someone's reputation, to poison every relationship they have, to make sure that everywhere they turn, they're met with suspicion, judgment, and rejection. They told your story wrong to everyone who would listen. They took your moments of vulnerability and twisted them into evidence of instability. They took your reactions to their abuse and presented them as unprovoked aggression. They carefully edited the narrative, removing all context, removing all their actions, removing all the provocation, until you looked like a villain and they looked like victims. And the people who heard these stories, they didn't question it. They didn't ask for your side. They just absorbed the narrative and started treating you differently. Colder, more distant, more judgmental. The smear campaign had layers, though. It wasn't just about making you look bad. It was about making sure you stayed isolated, making sure you couldn't build new connections, making sure your reputation preceded you wherever you went. They wanted to trap you in social quicksand where every step you took to defend yourself just made you sink deeper. Because here's the sick truth about smear campaigns. The target looks guilty no matter what they do. If you defend yourself, you look defensive. If you stay silent, you look guilty. If you get emotional, you look unstable. If you stay calm, you look cold. There's no winning move, no right response, no way out of the trap they've built. And they know that. That's why they do it. Because it's not about truth, it's about control. It's about making sure you never recover, never rebuild, never escape the shadow of the reputation they've constructed for you. But here's the thing about smear campaigns that manipulators always forget. Truth has a way of surfacing. Not immediately, not conveniently, but eventually. Eventually, people start noticing patterns. They start seeing the same behavior directed at someone new. They start questioning why this person always seems to be surrounded by drama, why everyone who gets close to them eventually gets destroyed, why their stories always paint them as the victim and everyone else as the villain. Eventually the mask slips, and when it does, when the truth finally crawls out of the darkness they tried to bury it in, everyone who participated in your destruction has to face what they've done. Some will apologize. Most won't. But all of them will know. And that knowledge will haunt them in ways you'll never see. Let me tell you what they did behind your back that would make you physically sick if you knew the details. They celebrated your failures. When you lost that job, when that relationship ended, when you hit rock bottom, they celebrated. Not openly, not publicly, but in those private spaces where they thought the truth couldn't reach anyone, they clinked glasses to your downfall. They called it karma. They called it justice. They called it you finally getting what you deserved. And the high they got from watching you suffer was addictive. It became their entertainment, their bonding activity, their shared obsession. Your pain brought them together in ways genuine friendship never could. Because toxic people don't bond over love. They bond over hate. They bond over a shared enemy. And you were that enemy, that focal point, that common cause that gave their shallow relationships meaning. They also did something particularly cruel that I need you to understand. They reached out to people in your life, people you cared about, people you trusted, and they poisoned those relationships before you even knew there was a problem. They'd have casual conversations where they'd drop little comments, little concerns, little observations about your behavior that planted seeds of doubt. They'd say things like, "I'm worried about them. They haven't been themselves lately." Or, "I don't know if you've noticed, but they've been acting really strange." Or, "I hate to say this, but I think they might be dealing with some serious issues." And these comments, delivered with false concern and manufactured worry, slowly eroded the trust other people had in you. By the time you interacted with these people again, they were already looking at you differently, already questioning your behavior, already primed to interpret everything you did through a lens of suspicion. And you had no idea it was happening. You just knew that suddenly people were acting weird around you and you couldn't figure out why. Here's another layer of betrayal that's going to sting. Some of the people who were closest to you, some of the people you trusted most, were feeding information back to your enemies. And some did that, and some didn't, and some didn't, and some didn't. They were double agents, pretending to be your friend while reporting your every move, your every word, your every vulnerability back to the people who wanted to destroy you. Every time you confided in them, thinking you finally had someone safe to talk to, they were screenshotting your messages, recording your conversations, taking mental notes to share later. Your pain was their currency. Your trust was their cover. And they played that role perfectly, maintaining the facade of friendship while actively participating in your destruction. When you eventually figure out who these people were, the betrayal will hit different. Because it's one thing to be attacked by enemies. It's another thing entirely to be sabotaged by people you loved. Now let's talk about the timeline. Because understanding when all this started will completely reframe your entire history with these people. You think the betrayal began recently, during whatever conflict or falling out you can remember. But the truth is darker. The seeds of this were planted long before you noticed anything was wrong. They were watching you with calculating eyes while you thought you were building genuine relationships. They were taking notes on your weaknesses while you were being vulnerable and authentic. They were planning their moves while you were trusting them completely. The betrayal didn't start when it became visible. It started in those quiet moments when you felt safe, when you let your guard down, when you believed you'd found your people. That's when they were gathering ammunition. That's when they were building their case. That's when they were preparing for the day they'd need to destroy you. The reason they waited so long, the reason they didn't strike immediately is because they needed you to trust them completely first. They needed you so deeply embedded in the relationship, so dependent on their validation, so convinced of their loyalty that when they finally pulled the rug out, the fall would be devastating. This wasn't impulsive cruelty. This was premeditated psychological warfare. They studied you like a subject, learned your patterns, identified your triggers, mapped your emotional landscape, and then used all that knowledge against you when the time was right. And the time became right the moment you posed a threat, the moment you started outgrowing them, the moment your light started shining too bright for their comfort. Because people like this can't handle being outshined. They can't handle watching someone they once felt superior to start leveling up. Your growth was their trigger. Your evolution was their declaration of war. Let's address the fake apologies, because some of them eventually reached out with what looked like remorse, but was actually manipulation, wearing a sorry mask. They didn't apologize because they felt guilty. They apologized because they needed to control the narrative, because they saw you moving on and thriving without them, because your absence was making them look bad. The apology wasn't for you. It was for their reputation. It was damage control. It was an attempt to rewrite history so they didn't look like the villain in your story. And the apology probably came with conditions, with explanations that somehow made it your fault too, with requests that you understand their perspective, with suggestions that maybe everyone was wrong, with pressure to just move on and let it go. But a real apology doesn't come with conditions. A real apology doesn't make excuses. A real apology doesn't try to share the blame. So when you received those words that looked like accountability but felt hollow, that's because they were. They were manipulation, dressed up as healing. Here's something truly disturbing that I need you to understand about their psychology. They genuinely believe they're good people. Despite everything they've done, despite the calculated cruelty, despite the coordinated destruction, they've convinced themselves they're the heroes of this story. They've reframed every malicious action as justified response. They've reinterpreted every moment of cruelty as necessary consequence. They've rebuilt the entire narrative in their minds until they're the victims and you're the villain. This isn't conscious lying. This is cognitive dissonance so powerful it rewrites reality, because admitting what they've really done would shatter their self-image completely. So instead, they double down. They commit harder to the lie, they build elaborate justifications, and they sleep at night believing they did nothing wrong. That's the truly terrifying part. Not that they're evil people who enjoy causing pain, but that they're so deeply self-deceptive they can't even see their own monstrosity. Now let's talk about what you should actually do with this information, because awareness without action is just painful knowledge. First, understand that you don't need to confront them. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to make them admit what they did or understand the damage they caused. That's not closure. That's giving them more access to you, more opportunity to manipulate, more chances to twist the narrative. Real closure is internal. It's accepting that these people showed you exactly who they are, believing them, and walking away without looking back. It's understanding that some people are so committed to their delusions that trying to make them see truth is like trying to convince someone they're dreaming while they're still asleep. You can't do it, and you'll just exhaust yourself trying. So instead, you close the door. Not with anger, not with explanations, just with finality. You block them everywhere, like the title suggests, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. Because every avenue of contact is an avenue for continued manipulation. Second, you need to grieve the relationship you thought you had, not the relationship that actually existed. You're mourning a fiction, a fantasy, a version of these people that never truly existed except in your imagination and their performance. The real them, the them that was orchestrating your destruction while smiling in your face, that person was always there. You just couldn't see it because you were looking at them through the lens of trust and love.